الله الرحمن الرحيم. أصحاب الفضيلة، السادة الحضور الكرام، الأساتذة الأجلاء، ضيوف هذا المهرجان، الأستاذ الجليل الزميل سي خالد أمين، معشر الطلبة والباحثين والمتخصصين والدارسين الوافدين على هذا الافتتاح، المجلس الافتتاحي. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. اسمحوا لي بداية أن أعبر عن سعادتي العارمة وأنا أقدم هذه الكلمة المتواضعة باسم كلية الآداب والعلوم الإنسانية بتطوان، والتي تحتضن أو تشارك في هذا المهرجان الذي يعنى بالشأن المسرحي وبالدراسات المسرحية، واختار طنجة لتكون قبلة وحاضنة لهذا النشاط الثقافي وهذه الفعالية التي اكتسبت بفضل جهود هذا السلة من الأساتذة الباحثين الذين ينتمون لكليتنا، اكتسبت سمعة دولية مشرفة. إذن فنعبر عن فخرنا كما قلت بأن تكون كلية الآداب شريكا في هذا النشاط الجميل الذي راكم تجارب امتدت لما ينيف عن 20 سنة من الفعل الأكاديمي والثقافي، جعل مهرجان طنجة الدولي للفنون المشهدية قبلة للخبراء الدوليين والباحثين والفنانين والطلبة والمثقفين الذين حجوا من كل بقاع العالم بمرجعيات فكرية وثقافية متباينة وحدتهم طنجة المشهدية. إنها جسر الحوار العابر للحدود وفضاء للتبادل الثقافي المثمر، وأثر ممتد يرسم بالخط البارز العريض القيم الحضارية والإنسانية لثقافات الفرجة. إننا في كلية الآداب أساتذة وطلبة وإداريين، وفي جامعة عبد الملك السعدي عامة، لنشعر بفخر الانتماء إلى هذا الفعل الثقافي الجميل الرفيع، ونعتز أيما اعتزاز بالشراكة المثمرة مع هذا المركز الدولي، مع المركز الدولي لدراسات الفرجة وكل شركاء طنجة للفنون المشهدية المحليين والدوليين. ونعتز أيضا بالأثر الذي خلفته من إصدارات علمية رصينة وبحوث محكمة وندوات دولية واكبت ثقافات الفرجة وتحولاتها الفنية والجمالية والطقسية والسياسية، وأطرت المفاهيم والحساسيات الجمالية للتجارب المسرحية والفنية بشكل عام، وتجرأت على تفكيك أسئلة وقضايا ثقافية راهنة، وخلقت الحدث على مدار عقدين من الزمان. خلف طنجة الفعل الثقافي فكر منفتح قائم على الحوار العادل بين الثقافات. أسس فلسفته الأستاذ خالد أمين، ورافقه باحثون ومبدعون مقتدرون، فتجلت معالمه في تأسيس فضاء للبحث العلمي عابر للتخصصات لا يعترف بالتخصص، وتثمين التعاون الدولي على مستوى البحث العلمي والإنتاج الفني الإبداعي، وربط البحث في دراسات الفرجة بالتجريب والممارسة، ودعم النشر والتوثيق والأرشفة الفنية، ثم بعد ذلك الترجمة باعتبارها فضاء ثالثا لتناسخ ثقافات الفرجة. أخيرا أجدني في هذه اللحظات المؤثرة الممتلئة بمشاعر النجاح والمجد الذي راكمه هذا المهرجان، أجدني مضطرا أن أسجي وافر الشكر إلى كل من كانت له إلى يد بيضاء في هذا المشروع العلمي والثقافي والفني الكبير، وبخاصة أعضاء فرقة البحث المسرحي التابعة لكليتنا العتيدة، وأعضاء المركز الدولي لدراسات الفرجة، وباقي أساتذة الكلية المنخرطين في هذا المشروع، وكل الأساتذة والباحثين المنخرطين في المشروع من الجامعات المغربية والدولية، وكل الخبراء الوطنيين والدوليين الذين تقاسموا معنا في هذا الفضاء الجميل تجربتهم العلمية والثقافية والفنية. وكذلك لا يمكن أن أنهي كلمتي قبل أن أثني وأثمن جهود الطلبة والباحثين الذين ساعدوا وتفانوا في التنظيم والتنسيق والترجمة، ومعهم أشكر الفنانين الذين أسعدوا بفرجاتهم جمهور طنجة المشهدية، وكل التقنيين والإداريين الذين يسهرون في الخفاء على حسن التنظيم. كما لا يفوتني أيضا أن أشكر كل الشركاء الذين ساهموا بسخاء في أن يخرج هذا المشروع من القوة إلى الفعل، وربطوا بين الواقع والطموح، واستطاعوا أن يعقدوا القران بين واقع وطموح أيضا. وإلى كل ضيوف طنجة المشهدية وجمهورها من المغرب ومن خارجه أوجه التحية والإكبار والإجلال، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
بهذه الكلمات الكريمة والجميلة أيضا للسيد عميد كلية الآداب والعلوم الإنسانية بتطوان، ننتقل مباشرة للمحاضرة الافتتاحية الأولى تحت عنوان Teaching as Performance، التدريس بوصفه أداء. من هو ريتشارد شاكنر؟ باختصار شديد، هناك يعني بالإضافة إلى حضوره معنا، أولا هناك تنازع حول التسمية، فهناك الكثير من نقاد العرب للأسف الشديد يترجمون حتى الاسم بشكل خاطئ، ريتشارد شاشنر، وقد استمعنا كثيرا لهذا وها هو الآن معنا سيؤكد أنه اسمه ريتشارد شاكنر، نبدأ بالسمية بعد هي الأولى. سعيد جدا أن المركز الدولي لدراسات الفرجة يقدم هذه الهدية الثمينة، أعتبرها شخصيا عوالم الأداء، دراسات في الأنثروبولوجي والمسرح، وهي باقة من يعني دراسات ريتشارد شاكنر موزعة على مجموعة من الكتب بطبيعة الحال. وهناك كتاب ثاني يعني في المستقبل القريب بطبيعة الحال. أشكر مجددا فريق الترجمة وعلى رأسهم أستاذ الأجيال أستاذ رضوان العيادي، ومن لا يعرفوه بطبيعة الحال ترجمات قوية جدا. وأشكر أيضا الأستاذ محمد جليد والأساتذة الكرام عبد العظيم هندا، محمد المجدقي وعبد المجيد السيد. وبكل تأكيد ستجدون في هذا الكتاب يعني هناك يعني مسائل أساسية جدا تقربنا من عوالم ريتشارد شاكنر. هذا بالإضافة إلى الفخر والاعتزاز بTDR، وقد تحدث الصديق العزيز الشاعر والباحث والكاتب صالح زمانان عن مستقبل TDR بالعربية. أولا هذه مجلة بطبيعة الحال دائعة الصيت، مدير التحرير هو ريتشارد شاكنر، تصدر عن منشورات جامعة كامبريدج بشراكة مع مدرسة تاج سكول بجامعة نيويورك، وأيضا المركز الدولي لدراسات فرجة، والآن بكل تأكيد مركز جزيل للبحوث الثقافية منذ بطبيعة الحال النسخة الثالثة اللي هي موجودة الآن، ولكن قريبا ستصدر يعني على الورق. هي الآن موجودة، ولكن كما قلت ستصدر قريبا إن شاء الله. إذا الكتاب عوالم دراسة عوالم الأداء موجود، وأيضا العدد الأول والثاني من TDR، كما أننا بصدد إعداد وإنهاء العدد الثالث. من هو ريتشارد شيكنر؟ بكل بساطة in English, one of the founders of performance studies, and is a performance theorist, theater director, author, editor of TDR and Enactment book series, and university professor emeritus at Tisch School, New York University. Richard Schechner combines his work in performance theory with innovative approaches to the broad spectrum of performance, including theater, play, ritual, dance, music, popular entertainment, etc. So he has a number of publications that include public domain environmental theater, performance theory, the theater of ritual, between theater and anthropology, performance studies and introduction, and performed imaginaries. As of 2024, his books have been translated into 22 languages, and I must say that maybe Arabic will be 23. So without much ado, I just give the floor to our distinguished guest, Richard Schechner.
Hello. I want to once again thank Khalid Amin and the Center for Performance Studies and everyone who has made my appearance here possible. I'll present this slow enough, I hope, that the translators can get it. And it's not so long because I want to have at the end a chance to have some dialogue with you who are here. It's in 7 short acts. Act 1, originality. Originality has a high value, but what is it? Does it even exist, originality? Traditional arts spin variations on themes, retellings, and redoings. So-called new works, original works, are copyrighted because they are presumed to be intellectual property. This is an extremely radical view of ownership, probably reflecting its opposite, the fear that nothing really belongs to anybody. A marvelous thing about Shakespeare is how unoriginal he was. Shakespeare was a playwright, spelled P-L-A-Y-W-R-I-G-H-T in English, not spelled P-L-A-Y-W-R-I-T-E. Right and right are pronounced the same, but they're radically different words. Right with an R-I-T-E is from a root, Indo-European root, meaning scratched on stone. Literally, the first writing was what was etched onto stone. I-W-R-I-G-H-T means the mastery of a craft, as in plowright, as somebody who knows how to do something. Has nothing to do with writing as we understand it from books. That is, playwright was a crafter of plays, not an author in the ordinary sense of plays. He was the author and writer in the W-R-I-T-E-R sense of sonnets and poems published during his lifetime with his collaboration. It was very different with his plays. The plays published while Shakespeare was alive were published without his supervision, many without his name on the title page. Some were bad quartos, some were, that is, bad quartos means garbled versions of his plays. Some were good quartos, but all were unauthorized publications. Even after he retired from theater in 1613, Shakespeare had no interest in publishing his plays. He lived in Stratford for 3 years after leaving the stage, and a publisher in Stratford earlier had published his Venus and Adonis poem. He also supervised during his lifetime his sonnets. So why did he not publish anything under his own supervision while he was alive? We can assume he could have published his collected plays, but chose not to. The first folio came out in 1623, 7 years after Shakespeare's death. Now, Gordon Craig, a great British theater innovator and director, lived about 125, 130 years ago. Gordon Craig theorized how Shakespeare composed his plays. The problem, according to Craig, and I share this, is how could one man in 22 years write 38 plays, works so different from one another, embodying such diverse personalities and actions? The poetry was of a piece, but not the characters, the plots, or the individual actions. We know where Shakespeare got his stories from a variety of sources, ranging from Italian stories and English history to classical literature and folklore, but never his own invention. But what about his people with their very particular gestures, their behaviors? Craig's idea was that Shakespeare came to rehearsals equipped with a story, a scenario, a sketch. He asked the actors of his company to improvise, instructing a scribe to write down what the actors said, even as the playwright noted how the actors interacted, how they treated each other, how they played out the narratives, what they did. Then Shakespeare went home with the words, the actions, the situations in hand, fashioning them into unrivaled verse. He was a great poet, no doubt, into unrivaled verse, giving each scene his own lyrical signature, his particular poetic vocabulary. But, and I emphasize this, the underlying realities of Shakespeare's plays, the roar of Lear, the laugh of Falstaff, the unwashable hands of Lady Macbeth, the prattle of Juliet, and so much more, were first off the makings of actors acting. I very much like Craig's idea about how Shakespeare worked. We do know that Shakespeare operated in a theater without a director in the modern sense, without anyone to control and harmonize each production. The actors gave Shakespeare his characters, just as the short stories, histories, chronicles, and broadsides gave him his plots. What he did was harmonizing the whole at the level of text. A master crafter of words, Shakespeare worked with others who were master crafters of theatrical characters and stage actions. And Shakespeare was an actor, so he also had the skill of an actor. Together, they made some of the greatest theater the world has ever known. Indeed, we have something similar in today's performing arts, but not in the theater of the performing arts, still signed by playwrights, but the movies. The director and stars get top billing, but the screenwriters, the composers, the costumers, the technicians, and dozens, if not hundreds of others also contribute. The writers, the screenwriters that is, provide the basic narrative and dialogue, revising between shootings. The actors often improvise. Because most scenes have several or even many takes, the editing possibilities are enormous. Post-production, that is, what happens after the scenes are filmed, is as important, perhaps even more important, than what happened on set. The film is revised again in the editing room. The director and the editors assemble everything available into the final strip of film we see in the theater. The montage, I should say, we see. Even that may have variations between the commercial release and what they call the director's cut. I think that by and large, from the 1920s to the present, at least in the West, the great movies are greater than the great plays. Film is today's major dramatic form. Whether or not digital media will take over from film remains to be seen. The cinematic method of collective creativity is very powerful. It can give the impression of individual originality, but what is original are the particular constructions and associations of the whole bundle, not the individual genius of just one person, no matter what the credits say. In the West, this kind of collective originality was seen before once. We can see it in the construction, the glasswork, the ornamentation, the architecture of medieval cathedrals. Also collective works, some of them constructed over hundreds of years. It's a kind of, making an aside, strange to see Notre Dame reconfigured as if it were frozen in time. That's a function, in my view, of tourism and commercialism rather than the real history of these cathedrals, which emerge and change over time. That's the end of Act 1. Act 2, teaching plagiarism. Helping students explore, and I'm going to tie these acts together, Act 2, teaching plagiarism, helping students explore what it means to be original from Act 1, and to challenge the sacred cow of originality, led me to assign them to write a paper that had to be plagiarized. I told them to write about something that was very important to them. Quote, I said, go to the library or do field research. Gather your information any way you can. Then write your paper with no regard about what came from where, about who thought it first, who said it first. Just write it the best way it can be written. You will fail in this paper if I can detect what writing is yours and what is taken from someone else. You will fail in this paper if you include any footnotes, endnotes, references, or attributions. Write it all seamlessly, as if you had invented it whole yourself, kind of like Shakespeare. Write it as well and as beautifully as you can, unquote. It's my instruction to the students. This was a course on theatrical tradition. It could have been a course on Shakespeare, where so much has already been written. I wanted the students to see that a narrow focus on obeying the scholarly rules may be preventing them from thinking through a problem, writing the best way they can, going as far out as they are able. I wanted them to recognize that originality probably is very rare, so why get hung up about it? These students were what we would call, quote, good students, quote. They rarely presented work that did not include many quotations and references and notes. But I reminded them very little is really ours. The language we speak does not belong to us personally. We use dozens of colloquial phrases every day, ways of speaking and writing that we did not originate. Why not footnote each of these? Of course, that would be absurd. Who was the first person to say in English, quote, that's all right, unquote, or, quote, thank you very much, unquote. And even if we knew, even if we could attribute it, why do it? I told them that I thought that much attribution in scholarship was, in my opinion, at that same level. And I know as an editor, because I receive these papers for TDR with lots of quotes, attributing something that actually is in general use is readily available knowledge. I also wanted them to readily experience how exciting, how frightening, how risky it is to write as if everything out there is available, everything can be used, however you wish to use it, no holds barred. Their task was to weave together their own ideas, textile weaving, not text writing. I'll get to that in a moment again. Their task was to weave together their own ideas, and ideas they stole in such ways that what was turned in formed a seamless web, a paper that could be well written, concise, cogently argued, but with, as I said, no footnotes, no attributions, and no quotation marks. Some of the students were frightened by this assignment. They wondered whether it was ethical. Was I teaching them how to cheat? They interrogated my motives. I pointed out that Shakespeare and the people of his day had no qualms about taking a narrative from Holinshed, a short story from Italy, a line or much more than a line from a colleague's writing, and never saying anything about it as they did it. Shakespeare, the first folio, doesn't have a footnote about Saxo Grammaticus and Hamlet, or Holinshed and Macbeth, et cetera, et cetera. That's what we scholars have done since. That in Shakespeare's time, just about everything was taken from anybody. Indeed, the idea of intellectual property did not exist back then for them. Everything was in the public domain. That Shakespeare did not give his sources, or even worse, that he carefully covered them up sometimes, has given employment to generations of scholars. Jokingly, I wisecracked to my students, quote, "If your plagiarism is brilliant enough, it will keep scholars busy a long time," unquote. Act 3, teaching the behavior of performance. The word text did not first refer to words, but to cloth, as in textile. This sense of text, the sense of textile, remains for me a living metaphor. How are the various strands of the text to be woven together into the whole cloth of performance? Even at the level of literary text, each piece of writing is a weaving together of its sources, its allusions, its particular locutions, and so on. Nothing is whole and indivisible. This multiplicity arose from oral traditions. Literacy itself, the ability to read silently from off a page, has its downsides. For me, that downside, in Western cultures especially, is an over-reliance on, quote, close readings, unquote, or the exegesis, the trying to unpack and understand, that derives from believing in the absolute force and authority of the written logos. This way of thinking about exegesis, close reading, and the sacredness of the text, the integrity of the text, derives from, in the West especially, but perhaps elsewhere as well, from the special status of the Bible in the West. The Bible's words are presumed to be in and of themselves sacred, each one, open to interpretation, of course, but not to revision. This is true even though most people read the Bible in translation. Very few read the Old Testament in Hebrew, the New Testament in Aramaic, which it was before it went into Greek. They usually read it in some local language, their own language, and yet they still revere the words of that text. I don't know if that's true of the Quran, whether the Quran is always read in Arabic. I know it's chanted in Arabic, or whether some people read it in other languages. I'm sure that perhaps in Indonesia, people might read it in other languages. That will be for our discussion. Someone can tell me. At any rate, in the West, most people read the Bible in translation. This adherence to exegesis, but not editing, was extended to all writing deemed to be, quote, literature. You can interpret Shakespeare, or Faulkner, or Melville, or anyone else you are studying, but you cannot change the words of their text. To this force of religion and its longtime ally, add capitalism, add its longtime ally, capitalism. To the force of religion, add capitalism. That is copyright, intellectual property, and such. And you get the practice in the theater that the words written by the playwright are always already fixed, that a director is allowed to interpret, add emphasis, enunciate in particular ways, highlight or undermine by staging, by setting, costume, lighting, and so on, but not change the text. As exegesis and interpretation took away over the much more flexible oral traditions, and oral traditions, while they were still oral, are very, very fluid, because our memory is fluid. Just as you play that game of going around a circle and telling a sentence and see what it is after 15 people have heard it and repeat it, and it's most often not the sentence that began. The oral tradition is always changing itself through accident, through people feeling they can improve it for whatever reasons. But once you get it set in stone, as it were, once you get RITE, that writing, then the text is set, and you can refer back to it and say, that's not what is set in stone. But that is because that's the way laws are done. That's the way, the Bible was supposed to be done. At any rate, the oral traditions are flexible. People lost the sense, when the oral tradition gave over to the written tradition, people lost the sense of texts as skeins of rhythms and sounds, as the weaving together of contending emotions and ideas, as living, spoken organisms. One of the big subversions that I and others made in the 1960s and 70s was to challenge this hegemony of the text. We made new versions of the plays we were directing. We didn't just interpret them. We did with them. We changed the words without claiming to have written something new. We changed the words without claiming to have written a new play. This was more than disparagement, more than parody, more than irony. It was a way of embodying the liveness of orality, where speaking actors in rehearsals made new kinds of texts, found new variations of existing texts. Master texts were deconstructed in this period of the 60s and 70s I'm talking about now. Master texts were deconstructed, both honored and ridiculed, generating many versions of themselves, teaching students that they can assimilate the words and ideas of others, the very sounds and feel of languages, into their own ways of handling words, is a step towards teaching them to embody the language of drama. Drama, in other words, interesting. It's not about writing, it's about action, the etymological root. The language of drama, to regard the language itself as behavior, the language, the words as behavior, not as something in stone, written in stone, which by definition is dead, is set, but as behavior. Organically morphing, not as a conduit or means of conveying ideas or feelings that, quote, really exist, unquote, elsewhere. We rejected, I continue to reject Platonism, that the really real is somewhere else, out of touch, that we only have the reflection of a shadow, as it were, if you know Plato's myth of the cave. I reject Platonism. No, we said, the language exists here and now, as I am speaking to you here and now in this room. pretty much what I've written, but not all that I've written, including what I've just said. No, we said, the language exists here and now, in these your bodies, as behavior. A long time ago, I gave up teaching dramatic literature, plays per se. What I do is to focus on embodied behavior, what I call restored behavior, the rehearsal into performance process. There are many ways to do this. I may ask students to research how certain directors worked. For example, an assignment might be to research a particular production, such as the Konstantin Stanislavski, Gordon Craig, 1911-1912 production of Hamlet, or a production of Heiner Müller's 1977 Hamlet Machine, which is itself a redoing and editing, a radical changing of Shakespeare's Hamlet, Hamlet Machine. Maybe even specifically Robert Wilson's 1986 production of Heiner Müller's 1997 text, which goes back, of course, to Shakespeare's text, I think, of 1604, Shakespeare's production of 1604. Or I instruct, quote, stage a scene from Shakespeare according to Peter Brook, or according to Ariane Minuchkin, or according to Jerzy Grotowski. I ask students to perform scenes in ways that deconstruct and reconstruct the texts. I encourage them to weave their own theatrical tapestries, to regard dramatic texts not as literature, but as threads of behavior, even as individual words that they reweave into new scenes. For example, quote, take the words of Hamlet, Ophelia, and Polonius, and only their words, and any of their words, from anywhere in the play they speak them, in any order, and make these words into a 10-minute scene that you will perform in class. Or I ask the students to confront one author's way with another. For example, quote, rewrite a scene from the Greeks, or from Shakespeare, or from Molière, or any playwright you pick, as Chekhov, as Neil Simon, as Sam Shepard, as Samuel Beckett might do, quote. Or, quote, do the gravedigger scene from Hamlet using only 45 words from it. What 45 words would you choose in order to express the basic action of that scene? And of course, if you assign this, you'll get 7 or 8 different 45 words, some of them overlapping. Alas, poor Yorick showed up in all of the answers. But aside from Alas, poor Yorick, everything else was different. And yet it came from that source, those 45 words, which themselves was derived from a larger source. And to do this, these students had to take this text again as behavior, not as text. They could only pick 45 words out of a scene, I don't know how many, had 200, 300 words in it. And how would they do it? How would they do the gravedigger? How would they do Hamlet, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Very interesting. I advise you to do it. In all these exercises, I insist that the text be treated as things, as concrete behaviors, as sounds, that the scenes take shape on stage as behavior, the stage being the classroom, of course. I've done some of this on my own in my directing and devising. I've mashed Richard III in King Lear into Richard's Lear. I've incorporated the words of Ophelia and Gertrude into Imagining O. And I deconstructed Macbeth with a C into Macbeth with a K. And if we have time in the question, I can go more into detail about these particular productions. In the Prometheus project, I combined Aeschylus's Prometheus Bound with accounts of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima, the link being fire, of course, with Annie Sprinkle's softcore pornography and the torture of an Iranian dissident, and the performer's own personal accounts of rape and abuse, All of these I find in the story of Prometheus and Io. And very often in my productions, I have the performers bring in their stories in parallel with or in opposition to the stories of the dramas they're enacting. So it's not like Stanislavski, where you want to find the parallel between the actor and the character and the actor's experience. I do that, but I want then the actor to enact their experience directly, not to infuse it in a character, and put it side by side in a kind of version of Brechtian Verfremdung effect. The actor's statement about the action and the action as it might be, they might find it in the character. I reworked Euripides' The Bacchae into Dionysus in '69, which you can see it's on film and it's available on YouTube. On the other hand, in many productions, I've stuck meticulously to the original text. I did Hamlet twice without messing with the text. I did Chekhov's Three Sisters in English and Cherry Orchard in Hindi, and I stayed close to the translated texts, which were supposedly accurate with the Russian. I've directed several new plays and honored those texts because I was working with living playwrights and they wanted me to, and I agreed. As a director, I have no hard and fast rules. Act 5, performance composition. Around 1990, I taught performance composition in the Performance Studies Department, Tisch School of the Arts, New York University. Students were asked to make performances about 15 minutes long using different compositional strategies: adaptation, deconstruction, autobiography, rhythm rather than meaning, meaning most of all, visuality, and so on. One of the strategies was something I'd never heard of before but wanted to try: performing scholarship. I wanted the students to explore how techniques used in theater, dance, music, and performance art could be applied to scholarship. At that time, most scholarly papers, except for those about art and music, were people standing, reading their essays, as I am doing, and often reading them poorly, as I hope I am not doing. Even art or music lectures were restricted to showing slides or film clips or listening to a little bit of music. Nothing radical. Remember, in 1990, the internet was young. Social media hardly existed. Facebook started in 2004, YouTube in 2005, Twitter, now X, in 2006. In the performance composition class, we experimented with several ways of performing scholarship, ranging from the obvious, use of slides, video, and audio, to more radical means. Fieldwork interviews were staged, restaged. The audience was questioned, and interaction encouraged during, not at the end of a presentation. Conflicting voices and opinions were heard. Scholars danced or played out short scenes relevant to the project at hand. Large listening groups were broken into smaller work groups who then participated in seminar-like situations. And some of these methods have, of course, been now absorbed more generally in when we go to scholarly conferences and things, and we do have work groups and so on and so forth. But at the time I was teaching this class, that was not the practice. We tried to find out whether cognitive information could be conveyed by means other than the read or spoken word. Although I don't think that part of performance composition devoted to performed scholarship was a success, I can't say that behavior at conferences has changed much, though it has changed some. The right questions were asked. Both I and the students learned to regard scholarly argument and data in a new way, as materials potentially to be performed, as well as information to be conveyed. I think this work needs to be taken up again, new, again. Act 6. My paper has 7 acts, so we're near the end. Act 6, the via negativa. The Latin phrase means the negative way, the way of the minus rather than the plus. On December 22nd, 1818, long time ago, the poet John Keats wrote to his brothers George and Thomas. Now I'm quoting John Keats, quote, "It struck me what quality went to form a man of achievement, especially in literature, and which Shakespeare possessed so enormously, is negative capability. That is, when a man is capable of being in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without any irritable reaching after fact and reason," unquote. That's Keats to his brother. Grotowski, too, spoke of the via negativa, that is, his mise-en-scènes arose from tensions and associations among materials from the classical, the traditional, the collective, and the individual sources. Grotowski emphasized that one develops a performance not mostly by acquiring new skills, but by removing obstacles, the via negativa. By that, removing obstacles allowed then a certain kind of organic methodology to emerge, which then Grotowski, who was a master teacher as well as a great director, would hone into something specific and score into a particular performance. I often work through negation, both as a writer and as a director. The negative is more resourceful than the positive. That is, I do not tell students or performers, this is what you should do. I tell them, don't do that. In rejecting something, what they present something and I say, no, not that. And then they say, well, what should I do? I say, I'm not sure. You do it. Not that. And there's a lot of not that going on, which at first irritates performers, but then they like that. They get the idea that in rejecting something, I'm searching for something, but I may not know what I'm searching for. It's like coming upon the promised land when you don't know what the promised land is until you come upon it. And then, even then, you're not sure. I tell them, don't do that. In rejecting something, the students or actors are encouraged to find something else. For me, a mise-en-scène is the least rejected of all the things tried. This is also the ancient Sanskrit wisdom that the Sanskrit word neti, N-E-T-I, not that, neti, not that. And when you make a performance, you are creating a world of not that in relation to the world outside the theater. Such an approach leaves open limitless possibilities. Students and performers have to find or invent what it is they do. This is the core of my restoration of behavior theory, which proposes that performances occur in the space between the not and the not, the space that opens in the denial of a denial. A negative multiplied by a negative in arithmetic equals a positive. If you reject enough, you will finally be at the basic what's left. Another way of understanding the double negative of performing is to realize that the performer playing, let's say, Hamlet, since we've been talking about Shakespeare, or any role, is simultaneously not Hamlet, but also not Hamlet. The performance takes place in the space between a negation and the denial of that negation. For example, let's take Laurence Olivier, who played Hamlet. He embodied the words and gestures, the relationships and patterns of Hamlet as interpreted by Olivier, yet everyone in the audience knew they were watching Olivier, the actor. He was already famous, and not the actual Prince of Denmark. A spectator does not, in my view, suspend disbelief. A spectator keeps the two beliefs and one negates the other. You do not forget that it's Olivier up there, but you do know that Olivier is not Hamlet, and yet he is Hamlet. Then during the performance, Olivier is not Olivier because he is Hamlet, but he is not Hamlet because he is Olivier. And this tension between these two is what gives the performance, theatrical performance, such a vibrancy. Very close, I think, theoretically, to Brecht's notion of a Fremdung effect, standing beside the action, even as you're doing the action. The program for Hamlet that you hold in your hands tells you that the person on stage is not Hamlet because the person on stage is identified as Laurence Olivier. The fact is, neither identity, Hamlet nor Olivier, is erased or even effaced by the other. What the spectators see and hear, what they watch, move, and enact, what gives them the special pleasure of the theatrical acts, is a being existing in the space between a denial and the denial of that denial. In several of the performances I've directed, performers use both their ordinary and their character names. They directly explore their peculiar phenomenological status as not and not. I try to make some of my classroom assignments equally ontologically insecure. As a teacher, if you take my classes, I'm not there to make you know more. I'm there to have you experience the wonder and the terror of knowing what you don't know, or starting to grasp what you might not know. Last act, meaning, 7. One of the shibboleths of teaching is that we have to get meaning, that without meaning, we have nothing. This is especially true of the Western canon when dealing with the classics, the Greeks, the Elizabethans, and also moderns such as Ibsen or Brecht. These are foundational items of Western culture and their modern exemplars. And so we demand that they carry the weight assigned, that we find in them the answers to ultimate cultural, social, political, and even ontological questions. Who are we? Where have we come from? What do we want? Where are we going? What should we do? But these questions are unproductive, especially if framed as, what did the playwright mean? What did the playwright intend? For the ancients and the Elizabethans especially, the best we could do is guess what the dramas might have meant to the people who wrote them and to the people who first received them. As for the moderns, yes, Brecht especially left us a lot about his plays. He was, after all, a director as well as author. But the times change. The information from a century ago, even if by the author, must be put into its own historical context. The more fruitful question, other than what does it mean, is what does it mean to us here and now? But even this question is not as generative as how does this play, or any text or starting point of questions, open me to behavior, suggest to me how to act, unquote. In other words, plays invite, demand performances. Yes, I know that Shakespeare and many other great playwrights live as words on a page. Fine. Read the plays as you might read a novel, but go to another place too. I say to my students, quote, I don't know what these words mean. I don't know because this text cannot mean except when you begin to behave it, unquote. When we begin to behave the words, begin to stage them, or even read them aloud, meanings fly out of mouths and emanate from faces, hands, and bodies in motion. Performers live the multiple languages and bodies that these dramas evoke. Regarding reading to yourself, the multiple voices remain imaginary. All the voices are versions of your own voice. Reading silently, so effective and efficient for comprehension and speed, reduces dramas to monologues. In times gone by, even literate people often read aloud. Today, prayers and hymns are publicly performed, collectively performed. For some texts, certainly, it is not wrong to move your lips and wag your tongue inside your mouth, even to enunciate out loud. Many great novelists composed their works to be spoken. Certainly the great ancient poets such as Homer and Valmiki and so on composed their epics, if they composed them at all, to be performed. Many great, but it isn't enough to read text out loud in an ordinary way. It is better to perform them in unconventional ways. Say the words very fast. Say them very slow. Sing them. Draw them out in the body, into the body. Whisper them as to a lover. Say them as to a feared person, as to your mother, as to a stranger. See what, so in telling an actor, it's not telling an actor. I don't tell an actor, you know, be this. I say, give this speech to your mother. Give this speech to someone you know on her or his deathbed. Give this speech to a cop who has stopped you on the road. In other words, in finding the destination of the speech, you find possibilities for what this speech may be. That destination not having anything necessarily to do with the narrative. It's a different kind of process, but it's very, very intriguing. See what movement the words generate in your body. Speak them while riding public transport. Answer the phone with them. You know, instead of saying, hello, to be or not to be, that is the question. You know, see what the person on the other side might say, you know, or whatever. Stretch and distort and renew them. I do not want to provide you with solutions, but with challenges, questions, and tools. Where does this rehearsing, deconstructing, and playing around with leave, quote, truth, quote? I am a radical relativist. I believe there are truths, but each truth exists in a special and a specific historical and social context. Each truth is true only when such and such circumstances are defined and operating. What is true at one time and one place is not necessarily true at another time and place. Indeterminacy does not mean that there are no truths, but that truth is contingent. What you think is a, quote, basic truth, a, quote, self-evident truth, a, quote, natural truth, a, quote, scientific truth, a, quote, God's truth, and so on, exists only because people negotiate the very existence of these truths, constantly refreshing their actual being. We need to train our students that that each generation must identify and construct, defend, and enhance the truths they want to live by. Neither God, nor nature, nor the U.S. Constitution, nor any other constitution guarantees them. We will be what we perform. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Richard, for such an eye-opening and enlightening lecture. You know that he could have been here just question-answer, like a master class, a dialogue, but he really, out of respect to everything what we are doing, so he preferred to have this lecture, which is quite fascinating and very deep and profound. And I promise you that it's going to be published and translated very soon. You know?
Well, then perhaps we need to retranscribe it, because what I have on that paper is not exactly what I said.
Yeah, good to know. Okay, so we have like 5 minutes because we have another performance upstairs, you know,
And
right there.
One thing
On the deck.
I'd be interested in is what techniques do you have for teaching? You know, you can ask me questions, I've spoken, but what do you do? Yes.
Just to save the time, I thank you all for this. I used to do to use the technique of what if. So when we read the play, then I allow them to put to answer the question what if, so they can change either the character or something in the plot. And this technique make them go and read the whole text and look for the indicative words that would suggest the next step or the next dialogue or whatever technique in the play. So what if worked very, very well with them, and they come up with creative, very creative endings and characters. Thank you.
Of course, what if is very closely related to Stanislavski's as if. And if is an extremely powerful tool. Somebody else?
Yes, thank you very much, sir, for this innovative ideas and point of views. So, according to you, what is the difference between to be a teacher of performance studies and to be a teacher performer, and in the same time to be a performer of performance studies? And thanks.
Again, I don't want to take too much time about me. I would like to hear more about you, but briefly, what is it to be a child, a parent, and a friend all at the same time? They're simultaneous, and you know, theater teaches us. We, as Shakespeare said, we play many different roles. So they overlap, they reinforce each other, but we shouldn't spend too much time worrying about how they might contradict each other. What you might say to a 2-year-old child, and what you might say to a dear one on his deathbed, and what you might say to your lover, and what you might say to a stranger, all who asks, what's the weather like today, would be very different. It's a really interesting exercise to take a very common question like, what's the weather today? Or are you going shopping? And say, well, how would you say that to these people in these different circumstances? Because circumstances define and evoke behaviors. And behaviors in theater, it's the behavior, as I tried to emphasize, that gives us the vitality, the core of what not only theater, but all performance, even performance in everyday life are determined by given circumstances. Thank you for your question, though. And again, maybe somebody has some other teaching technique. I'd like to learn up here if you could teach me something.
Just crushing your face. Anyway.
Well, or if you have a question for me, I'll answer your question.
Okay, I have one just brief comment, if you don't mind. Yeah, I mean, moving from Act 1 about originality, and particularly the focus on Shakespeare, to Act 7, you know, about meaning. It's an incredible journey, you know. But yeah, talking about originality and plagia and all this, when it comes to the folios of Shakespeare, just recently, very recently, you know, there was a huge production of the opera Zarqa al-Yamama in Saudi Arabia. And Zarqa happens to be, you know, deeply rooted in the Saudi, culture and the Arabian Peninsula. As a woman with a strong insight and she is able to see, you know, the traveler coming from a distance of 3 days. But what's important is about the Bentham forest in Macbeth. So this again it's something that came from the Arabian Peninsula and traveled throughout geography and culture and time, and the source criticism. There was no mention of the thing when it comes to Macbeth. Of course, others like Othello, etc. Everything, this was like Shakespeare was inspired from this or that, but never Zarqa al-Yamama,
Well, that's very interesting to know. So, Birnam Wood came from Arabia?
I mean, that was the prophecy of Zarqa. Like 4 or 5 centuries before Islam. That was a prophecy. Like 2 tribes were fighting each other, and she told her tribe that beware that, soldiers holding trees or behind the trees are coming to you. And that was like, picked up like this, edited in the Shakespearean, of course, Third and Three Witches and all.
Yes, that's very, very interesting. And that particular action, Birnam Wood coming to Dunsinane and the soldiers with the trees, it has to be behaved. You can't really, it doesn't live on a page. It's a kind of thing, you see this moving forest, right? Any rate, any other questions or comments? Yes, sir. Here, come get a microphone. Thank you.
Hello, sir. Thank you for the lecture. I'm a theater director. I have 33 years. I'm 33 years old, and I'm basically directing 4 plays per year, 4 performances. And I wanted to ask you, from your experience, as you're getting older, from my experience, am I getting older and more experienced? I'm getting better and better. But of course, you have so much more experience. So as you are getting older, are you still improving? Do you still have this, passion for directing? Do you still want to keep going?
Well, those are several questions. I'll try to answer them. One doesn't know if you get better and better. It's nice. The myth of progress, which is, it's a very powerful myth in the West. I don't know how it is in the Arab world or in other worlds, that everything gets better and better. It's been taken up by advertising, is a myth. I think throughout life, we go in waves. We get better, we get worse, but better and worse themselves can only be understood relativistically. Better in what sense? In relationship to what? Better at what? So I think one of the things I'm a little better at now is listening to other people. And perhaps I'm a little more patient now, whether this is because I'm quite old and I've given up, or whether it's wisdom, who knows. I do think that, so that's one question. So I don't know if I'm getting any better. You ask if I still have the passion for directing. That's also complicated. I have the passion for directing, but I have an abhorrence about raising money. And in my society, at least, it's very hard to do a fairly good quality kind of production without having some kind of financial resources and the freedom to rehearse. And, when I think of Stanislavski having all those years to work while he's at the Moscow Art Theater or Grotowski or what have you, a Minushkin still. So the economic circumstances make it very difficult. Right before COVID, I was working on a project called Dark Yes. And that project combined Heart of Darkness of Joseph Conrad. Yes, I know that. I was thinking of his Polish name. Heart of Darkness of Joseph Conrad, and Molly Bloom's soliloquy at the end of James Joyce's Ulysses, and the personal recollections of the performers. What linked these two, it's called Dark Yes, together was the fact that Ulysses itself as an epic and Joyce's poem, Joyce's novel is about a journey, the journey of Bloom through Ireland and all the pubs, and Penelope Mali's waiting for him, and Conrad's is about the journey up the Congo River. And I wanted to do this as dinner theater in a river in New Jersey, starting at a place where I performed in Montclair, New Jersey, called Peak Performances, which is a fairly upscale community. And the Passaic River runs down through the city I was born in, Newark, which is a largely African-American black city now. And the river goes through some of the poorer neighborhoods. So I felt that having a dinner theater with that story in that situation would have a lot of opportunity. But it never got further than some about 6 months worth of workshops. But yes, I would direct again if given the opportunity.
Hello, thank you for the lecture. I'm Eftim from Macedonia. Tomorrow we are having a theater play lecture from UNESCO. And you said that you are interested of sharing some of our experience and our ways of doing some style of theater. And I just want to share because I correlate, because I've so much had the same from the lecture, from your lecture. I was so much inspired, and I was thinking something that we have done as a young actors a long time ago, but it's just still for me is one of the best experiences that we have done. Chekhov, Ivanov, first month was a play by Stanislavski. We have done Chekhov by Stanislavski, and then the second act, the same group of actors done the Chekhov, Ivanov, with
Now, excuse me, can you please just go to the point? Because we have a performance.
Yes, shortly. And we have done Chekhov by Stanislavski and Chekhov by Merhold, and it was an extraordinary experience.
I just have to say something. My Three Sisters was in 4 acts: Stanislavski, Meyerhold, as it performed in a gulag and a radio play. So it's kind of very wild that we did the same thing.
The conversation will go on and on. Professor Richard Schechner is here for the whole festival. Please, you can, ask him to sign your book. But now we have a performance upstairs in the terrace. So please join. Thank you very much.